In a world where crowns are cages and queens vanish into smoke, one king learned too late that power without trust is just a gilded tomb. King Valor ruled an empire of marble and lies, but when the woman he destroyed walks back through those palace doors with his bloodline at her side, every calculated move he ever made shatters like glass. This is the story of what happens when survival meets desire, when betrayal wears a familiar face, and when the deadliest weapon in any kingdom is the truth no one wanted to hear. Stick with me till the end, smash that like button, and drop your city in the comments so I know my tribe is watching. Let's get into it. The obsidian corridors of the palace swallowed sound like a throat swallows blood. Vialor stood at the eastern balcony, hands locked behind his back, staring at the iron-gray sky that hung over his empire like a threat. The wind cut through the courtyard below, scattering dead leaves across stones so old they remembered kings whose names had turned to dust. He did not move, had not moved in nearly an hour. The servants knew better than to approach when he stood like this, a statue carved from ice and old rage. His empire, his prison. The word tasted like ash in a mouth that had forgotten how to smile. Footsteps. Soft but deliberate. Valor did not turn. "You summoned me, my king. Lord Calyx." The voice was smooth as oil on water, the kind of voice that slid into cracks and widened them. Valor let the silence stretch another 5 seconds before he spoke. "The Northern Territories. Report." Calyx moved to stand 3 paces behind him. Never beside, never equal. "Stable, Your Majesty. The garrisons hold, trade routes are secured, no whispers of dissent." Valor's jaw tightened. Calyx was a liar. Not about the facts, those were accurate enough, but about the spaces between the facts, the unsaid things that mattered more than troop movements and grain shipments. The man lied by breathing. And the other matter. Calyx hesitated. It was brief, a flutter of a moth's wing, but Vialor caught it. He caught everything now. That was what the crown had done to him, sharpened him into a blade that cut even when he did not mean to. "The Lady Morgesa has accepted your proposal, my king. The union will proceed as planned." Valor said nothing. Down in the courtyard, 2 guards crossed paths, their armor clinking in rhythm. One laughed at something the other said. The sound reached him like an echo from another world. "Leave me." Calyx bowed and retreated. His footsteps faded into the maze of corridors, absorbed by stone and shadow. Valor remained. The sky darkened another shade. Rain was coming. He could smell it on the wind, iron and earth, and the promise of something breaking open. Lady Morgesa. A strategic choice. Her family controlled the southern ports, had gold enough to fund 3 wars and influence that stretched like spider silk across the empire. She was beautiful in the way expensive things are beautiful. Polished, cold, perfect. He felt nothing when he thought of her. That was the point. Feeling was the crack in the foundation. Feeling was how empires fell. He had learned that lesson in blood and silence, learned it the night Cerys walked out of his life and took the last warm thing in his chest with her. The court had whispered, barren, weak, unworthy. The words had slithered through the halls like poison, and he had let them because stopping them would have meant admitting she mattered. Admitting she mattered would have meant admitting he had failed to protect what was his. So he hardened, became stone where he had been fire, became calculation where he had been instinct. And now the stone was all that remained. The rain began. Fat drops that struck the balcony rail and exploded into smaller pieces, each one a tiny death. Valor watched them fall and thought about control, about the iron grip required to hold an empire together when every noble in the court wanted your throat, about the kind of strength that looked like cruelty because mercy was a luxury kings could not afford. He thought about Cerys, even now, even after all this time. Her face still appeared in the spaces between thoughts, uninvited and unwelcome. Dark eyes that saw through pretense, a mouth that curved when she was about to say something that would either save him or destroy him. The way she moved through a room like water, finding its level, effortless and inevitable. Gone. He crushed the thought, turned from the balcony. Rain soaked his shoulders, but he barely felt it. Inside the palace, warmth waited, fires in every hearth, wine in every cup, nobles who smiled and schemed and would slide a knife between his ribs if they thought they could survive the aftermath. This was his kingdom. This was what he had chosen. This was the price. The great hall stretched before him like the spine of some massive dead thing. Pillars rose into shadows, each one thick as three men standing shoulder to shoulder. Torches burned in iron sconces, their light insufficient and flickering. The throne sat at the far end, black stone veined with gold. A seat built for giants or gods or men who had forgotten they were neither. Velor walked toward it, each step echoed. Each echo died alone. A king does not sit on a throne because he wants to. He sits because the alternative is watching someone else sit there. And that someone else will be worse, will be weaker, will let the empire fracture into warring pieces that devour each other until nothing remains but ash and memory. This is what he told himself. This is what he had to believe. He reached the throne, but did not sit. Instead, he turned, surveying the empty hall. Tomorrow it would fill with petitioners and sycophants, with merchants seeking favor and lords seeking advantage. They would bow and scrape and smile with their mouths while their eyes calculated how much he was worth dead versus alive. He knew this, had always known this. The crown did not make you loved, it made you necessary. And the moment you stopped being necessary, the knives came out. Theris had understood that. She had moved through the court like she was playing a game only she could see, 3 moves ahead of everyone else. When she laughed, it was real, and when she smiled, it was a warning. The nobles had feared her more than they feared him, and they had been right to. And then she was gone. The rumor had spread like fire through dry grass. The queen is barren. The queen has failed her duty. The queen is weak. He had watched it happen, done nothing to stop it because stopping it would have meant showing his hand, would have meant revealing that her absence carved a hole in him he did not know how to fill. So he filled it with ice instead, with distance, with the kind of cold precision that turned a man into a machine. It worked. The court settled. The empire held. He survived. But survival was not the same as living, and he had long since stopped pretending otherwise. Thunder cracked outside, close enough to rattle the windows. Velor moved to one of the tall, narrow openings that passed for windows in this ancient place. Rain lashed the glass. Beyond it, the city sprawled in darkness, 1,000 lights fighting against the storm. His people, his responsibility, the weight he carried because no one else would. Sometimes he wondered what would happen if he just walked away, left the crown on the throne, and disappeared into the night like Ceres had. But the thought never lasted long. Walking away was not in his nature. He was not built for retreat. He was built to hold ground, to dominate, to win, even when winning meant losing everything else. That was the Alpha's burden. The world did not allow men like him to rest. It tested them constantly, probed for weakness, punished hesitation with death. So he did not hesitate, did not show weakness, did not rest, and the world kept testing. The doors at the far end of the hall slammed open. Velor turned, hand dropping to the dagger at his belt before conscious thought caught up with instinct. A guard stumbled through, rain-soaked and gasping. "Your Majesty!" "Speak." The guard swallowed hard, eyes wide with something that looked like terror or wonder or both. A party at the gates. "They demand entrance. They say—" Velor's voice dropped to a register that made strong men step back. "I do not care what they say. Turn them away. Your Majesty, the woman leading them claims, she says she is Queen Ceres." The world stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Velor felt it in his chest, a sudden absence of motion like the space between heartbeats stretched into eternity. The guard was still talking, but the words became noise, meaningless sound against the roar building in his skull. Impossible. He heard his own voice from very far away. "Describe her." The guard's throat worked. Dark hair. Dark eyes. "She carries herself like she owns the ground she walks on. And there are 2 others with her. Young, maybe 16. They have your—" Enough. Velor moved. Not toward the doors. Toward a side corridor that led to the ramparts, to a vantage point where he could see the main gates without being seen. His heart hammered against his ribs like a prisoner against bars. This was a trick. Had to be a trick. Some ploy by enemies who thought they could destabilize him with ghosts and lies. Ceres was gone. Had been gone for 16 years. The dead did not return. He reached the rampart, pressed against cold stone slick with rain. Below, torches illuminated the gates. And there, standing in the downpour like she had every right to be there, was a woman who wore Ceres's face. No, not wore, was. Valor's breath stopped. She had changed, not in the ways that mattered, but in the ways that told stories. Harder edges, scars he could see even from this distance, thin white lines that crossed her forearms like a map of survival. Her hair was shorter, pulled back tight. Her clothes were travel-worn but well-made, the kind of practical gear someone wore when they had learned to value function over ornament. But it was her eyes that confirmed it. Even across the distance, even through rain and darkness, he knew those eyes, had seen them in dreams and nightmares for 16 years. And beside her stood two figures, young, strong, moving with the unconscious synchronization of twins who had spent their entire lives together. His blood, his heirs. The world tilted. Valor gripped the stone hard enough to split skin. This was not possible. This was not real. But reality did not care about possibility. Reality stood at his gates with proof that everything he thought he knew was a lie. Ceres looked up. Not at him. He was too well hidden. But up at the palace itself, at the obsidian walls and golden windows and the throne room where he had ruled alone for 16 years. Her expression was unreadable. No anger, no fear, just a terrible calm, the kind of calm that came before violence. Valor moved before he could think. Down from the rampart, through corridors that blurred together, past guards who tried to speak and fell silent when they saw his face. He reached the entrance hall just as the doors were opening, just as Ceres stepped across the threshold with water streaming from her cloak and murder in her eyes. Their gazes locked. The court had gathered. Of course they had. News like this traveled faster than wildfire, and already Valor could hear the whispers starting, the rustle of schemes being adjusted and alliances being reconsidered. But he heard it all from underwater, distant and distorted. Ceres stopped 3 paces inside. The twins flanked her, a boy and a girl, both with his jawline and her eyes, and something else, something wild and unbroken that made them look like weapons forged in secret. The hall held its breath. Ceres spoke first. Her voice was exactly as he remembered it, low and clear and edged with iron. "Hello, husband." The word landed like a blade. Husband. A title he had not heard in 16 years. A claim she had no right to make and every right to make, and the contradiction of it threatened to split him in half. He forced his voice to work, forced it to stay level, controlled, kingly. "You dare return." It was not a question. Questions implied uncertainty, and he could not afford uncertainty. Not here, not in front of the entire court. Ceres smiled. It was not a kind smile. "I dare many things, Valor. I always did. You used to appreciate that about me." The court was silent. Utterly, completely silent. This was the kind of moment that became legend, that people would whisper about for generations. The queen who vanished, the king who turned to ice, the confrontation that could shatter an empire or forge it anew. Valor descended the steps slowly, each footfall deliberate, each second measured. He stopped when he was close enough to see the pulse beating in her throat, close enough to smell rain and road dust and something else, something that might have been fear but looked like fury. "You left." 2 words. 16 years of silence compressed into 2 words. Ceres did not flinch. "I survived." The boy on her right shifted his weight. The girl's hand moved toward a blade Valor only now noticed strapped to her thigh. His children, raised by Ceres, taught by Ceres, shaped by whatever crucible she had found in the years since she walked away from his throne. Lord Calyx stepped forward from the crowd. His voice was honey over poison. "Your Majesty, surely this matter requires private discussion. The court need not—" See, Valor's head snapped toward him. The look in his eyes made Calyx's words die unfinished. "The court will witness. This woman claims to be queen. These children claim to be heirs. Let all present hear what is said." He turned back to Ceres. She was watching him with an expression he could not read, something complex and layered and dangerous. "You abandoned your throne, your people, your duty." Each word was a hammer blow, each one designed to hurt. Because if he hurt her first, maybe it would hurt less when she inevitably hurt him. But Ceres did not break, did not even bend. I abandoned nothing. I was driven out. By lies. By cowards. By men who saw a queen who could not immediately produce an heir and decided she was worthless. Her voice rose not in volume, but in intensity. I carried your children, Valor. I carried them for months while your court whispered poison, while your advisors suggested I be set aside, while you said nothing, did nothing. I left because staying would have killed them, killed me, and you would have let it happen because a king cannot afford to look weak. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Valor felt something crack inside his chest. Not break. Crack. A fracture that had been there for 16 years, finally spreading wide enough to hurt. I searched for you. His voice was quieter now, almost human. For months, years, you vanished like smoke. Ceres's laugh was bitter. You searched where it was convenient to search, where it would not make you look desperate, where it would not threaten your precious control. But you did not search where I went. You did not search in the places where queens go when they are running for their lives. The twins were watching him now, not with hatred, worse than hatred, with curiosity, like he was a problem to be solved, a threat to be assessed. They did not know him, had never known him, and that was a wound deeper than any blade could cut. The girl spoke. Her voice was clear and sharp and utterly fearless. Are you our father? The question shattered something. Valor looked at her, really looked at her, and saw himself reflected back. The same eyes, the same stubborn set to the jaw, the same refusal to bend that had defined his entire life. Yes, the word came out rough, scraped raw. The boy's turn now. Then why did you let her leave? Children ask the questions adults are too afraid to speak. Children cut to the bone without mercy because they do not yet understand that some truths are too dangerous to say aloud. Valor had no answer. Not one that would satisfy. Not one that would not make him look like exactly what he was. A man who chose power over love because love was the one thing he could not control. Ceres stepped closer. Now they were almost touching, close enough that he could feel the heat coming off her body. Close enough that every instinct screamed at him to either pull her close or push her away, and he was paralyzed between the two. I came back for one reason, Valor. One reason only. Our children deserve to know their legacy, deserve to claim what is theirs by blood, and I will not let your court of vultures deny them again. Her hand rose. For a moment he thought she might strike him. Instead, she touched his chest, palm flat over his heart. You want to know why I left? Feel that. Feel how fast your heart is beating. That is fear. That is the thing you have spent 16 years trying to kill, but it is still there, still alive, still proving you are not the ice statue you pretend to be. He should move, should step back, should reassert control. But he stood frozen, her hand burning through fabric and skin straight to the core of him. You do not get to come back and tell me what I feel. His voice was a growl. Ceres smiled again. This time it was sad. I do not need to tell you. You already know. You have known since the moment I walked through those doors. The question is what you are going to do about it. She dropped her hand, stepped back, addressed the court without taking her eyes off him. I claim my place as Queen Ceres, rightful wife of King Valor. I present my children, his heirs, blood of his blood. Any who dispute this can speak now. Silence. Not the silence of agreement, the silence of calculation. Every noble in the hall was running numbers, weighing options, deciding which side of this conflict offered the best chance of survival. Lord Calyx cleared his throat. Your Majesty, the matter of succession is complex. Legal scholars must examine. Enough! Valor's voice cut through the noise like a blade through flesh. Clear the hall! The court hesitated. He raised his voice to a roar that made the torches flicker. I said, clear the hall. They moved, scrambled. Within minutes, the great hall emptied until only Valor and Ceres and the twins remained, standing in a space built for hundreds, surrounded by echoes and shadows. Valor turned to the children. What are your names? The boy answered first. Kael. The girl second. Lyra. Strong names, names that meant sharp and star. Names that Ceres would have chosen. He looked at Ceres, really looked at her. Tried to see past the armor she wore, past the scars and the distance and the 16 years of silence. Why now? Why not 5 years ago? 10? Because 5 years ago they were children. 10 years ago I was still learning how to keep them alive. Now they are old enough to fight for what is theirs, and strong enough to survive what comes next. What comes next? The phrase settled over him like a shroud. You think there will be war. It was not a question. Ceres's expression was grim. I think the people who drove me away are still here, still whispering, still poisoning, and they will not accept my return without a fight. Valor's jaw clenched. She was right. Of course she was right. Already the schemes would be forming, the alliances shifting. The court would fracture into those who supported the queen's return and those who saw it as an opportunity to seize power in the chaos. He had spent 16 years building a kingdom of ice and control, and in one night, Ceres had walked back in and set it all on fire. Part of him hated her for it. Part of him had never stopped loving her. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Kael spoke up, his voice cutting through the tension. Are you going to send us away again? The question was simple. The answer was not. Valor looked at his son. His son. The word still felt foreign in his mouth. No. Lyra's eyes narrowed. Why should we believe you? Because I do not lie. I manipulate, I control, I dominate. But I do not lie. And I am telling you now, you are my blood. That means you are mine to protect. He turned to Ceres. You want them acknowledged. Fine. They are acknowledged, but this changes nothing between us. Ceres laughed. It was a sound without humor. Everything has changed, Valor. You just have not admitted it yet. She moved toward the doors, the twins falling in beside her. We will take rooms in the east wing, the ones I used to occupy. I assume they are still empty. They were. He had ordered them sealed the day she left, had not set foot in them since. You assume much. Ceres paused at the threshold, looked back over her shoulder. I assume nothing. I know you. Know how you grieve. Know that you bury things rather than face them. Those rooms are empty because opening them would mean admitting I mattered, and that is a weakness you cannot afford. She was gone before he could respond. The twins followed, the doors closed. Valor stood alone in the great hall. Rain hammered against the windows. Thunder rolled through the foundations. He had faced armies, conspiracies, assassins, famine, plague. Every test a king could face, he had faced and survived. But this was different. This was Ceres standing in his court, alive and furious and right. This was children who looked at him like a stranger. This was the past, refusing to stay buried. He walked to the throne, sat. The stone was cold even through his clothes, cold and hard and eternal. A king does not get to choose his battles. He gets to choose how he fights them. Somewhere in the palace, Ceres was settling into rooms that still smelled like her. Somewhere, his children were learning the layout of a home they had never known. Somewhere, enemies were sharpening knives. And Valor sat on his throne, feeling the crack in his chest spread wider, and wondered if 16 years of ice was enough to survive the fire that had just walked back into his life. Because Ceres was not wrong. Everything had changed. And the worst part, the part that terrified him more than any blade or poison or conspiracy, was that he wanted it to change. Wanted to reach for what he had lost. Wanted to stop being the Stone King and remember what it felt like to be human. But wanting was the first step toward weakness. And weakness was death. So he sat. And he waited. And he planned. Because this was not over. This was just beginning. And when morning came, when the court assembled and the whispers started and the games began, he would be ready. He had to be. Because the alternative was unthinkable. The alternative was losing her again. And he had already done that once. He would burn the empire to ash before he did it twice. Dawn broke over the palace like a wound splitting open. Valor had not slept. Had not even tried. He stood in the throne room watching gray light creep across the floor, thinking about the way Ceres had looked at him last night. Not with love, not with hatred, with something worse. Recognition. Like she saw straight through the armor he had spent 16 years forging and found the man underneath still bleeding from wounds that never healed. He heard them before he saw them. Footsteps in the corridor. Multiple sets. The court was assembling early today. Of course they were. Blood in the water made sharks brave. The doors opened. Lord Calix entered first, followed by Lady Morgessa and a dozen others. Their faces were composed, carefully neutral, but Veilor could read the excitement underneath. This was the kind of chaos ambitious people dreamed about. A queen returned, heirs suddenly appearing, the entire line of succession thrown into question, every power structure in the empire suddenly vulnerable. Calix bowed. It was a fraction too shallow. Your Majesty, we must discuss the situation. Veilor did not move from his position by the window. There is no situation. There is only reality. The Queen has returned. My heirs have been presented. The matter is settled. Lady Morgessa stepped forward. She moved like water over stones, beautiful and cold. Her voice was silk wrapped around steel. My lord, with respect, the matter is far from settled. There are questions of legitimacy, of law, of precedent. A woman cannot simply walk into the palace after 16 years and claim, she can when she is queen. Veilor's voice dropped to a register that made the temperature in the room fall 10 degrees. When she is my wife, when the children she presents carry my blood. Do you dispute these facts, Lady Morgessa? The woman's jaw tightened. She was smart enough to know a trap when she heard one. Of course not, Your Majesty. I merely suggest that proper protocols must be observed for the stability of the realm. Protocols. The word was a weapon disguised as bureaucracy. Veilor had used it himself 1,000 times. Delay, obstruct, create enough procedural chaos that the issue died from exhaustion before it could be resolved. He turned to face the assembled nobles. Let them see his eyes. Let them see that he was not a man who negotiated when his blood was involved. Here is the protocol. Cerys is queen. Kael and Lyra are heirs. Anyone who challenges this challenges me directly. And I promise you, that is a fight you will lose. Silence. The kind of silence that came when people were recalculating odds and not liking the new numbers. Lord Calix tried again. His voice was reasonable, sympathetic, the tone of a man trying to save a friend from a terrible mistake. Your Majesty, consider your position. You have spent years rebuilding stability. The arrangement with Lady Morgessa's family secures the southern trade routes, ensures peace with... The arrangement with Lady Morgessa is void. Veilor said it without inflection. A fact, not a negotiation. Morgessa's composure finally cracked. Her voice rose. You gave your word. My family has already begun preparations. The contracts are signed. Contracts can be broken. Words can be taken back. I am king. I decide what stands and what falls. It was brutal. It was unfair. It was exactly the kind of autocratic power play that made nobles whisper about tyranny. But Veilor was past caring about whispers. Cerys was back. His children were here, and he would burn every bridge in the empire before he let court politics separate him from them again. Morgessa's face went white, then red. She opened her mouth to speak, but Kylix touched her arm. A warning. She closed her mouth, bowed stiffly, turned and left. Half the assembled nobles followed her. The ones who remained were the ones who had always been loyal to Cerys, the ones who remembered what the court had been like when she walked its halls. Veilor marked their faces, made note of who stayed and who left. In the Game of Thrones, neutrality was a myth. You were either with him or against him, and the ones who left had just declared themselves. Calix remained. Of course he did. Calix was too clever to burn bridges openly. He would wait, watch, probe for weaknesses. That was what made him dangerous. Veilor dismissed the rest with a gesture. They filed out, leaving him alone with Kylix and the morning light that now filled the room like an accusation. You are making a mistake. Calix said it quietly, almost gently. Veilor laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. You think I do not know that? You think I have not spent the entire night cataloging every way this destroys everything I have built? But it does not matter. They are mine. That is the only calculation that matters. Calix moved closer, dropped his voice to the register men used when they spoke truths too dangerous for public consumption. She left you, Veilor, abandoned you, let the court rip you apart with rumors while she disappeared. And now she comes back with children who may or may not be yours, making demands, destabilizing everything. This is a play for power, nothing more. The words hit like fists, because part of Veilor had thought exactly the same thing. Part of him wondered if this was all a scheme, some long con designed to take what he had built while he was too blinded by old feelings to see it coming. But then he thought about the way Saris had looked at him, the scars on her arms, the hardness in her eyes that came from surviving things that would have broken lesser people. If this was a con, it was the most elaborate and painful one imaginable. "Get out, Your Majesty." I said, "Get out." Calyx bowed and left. Valor stood alone in the throne room again. Alone seemed to be his natural state, the place he returned to no matter how many people surrounded him. He needed to see her, needed to understand what this was, what she wanted, what game they were playing. He found her in the East Wing. The doors to her old chambers stood open. Inside, servants moved frantically, unpacking trunks and airing out rooms that had been sealed for 16 years. Valor stopped in the doorway, watched. Ceres stood by the window, the same window she used to stand at, looking out over the gardens. Her hair was loose now, falling past her shoulders. She looked younger like this, more like the woman he had married and less like the weapon she had become. She sensed him, turned. "Come to check if I am stealing the silverware?" Her tone was light, but her eyes were not. Valor stepped inside. The servants scattered, smart. This was not a conversation anyone else needed to hear. The door closed. They stood 10 feet apart. The space between them felt like an ocean. "Why did you really come back?" Ceres smiled. "It was tired. I told you, for them, so they could claim what is theirs. That is not the whole truth." "No, it is not." She moved to a chair, sat, gestured to another, an invitation. Valor remained standing. Sitting felt like surrender. Ceres sighed. "I came back because I am dying, Valor." The words landed like stones in still water. Ripples spread outward, distorting everything. "What?" "There is something wrong, inside. The healers call it a wasting disease. I have maybe a year, maybe less. And I will not die in exile while my children are denied their birthright because of lies I never had the chance to refute." Valor felt the floor tilt. This was not what he expected, not what he had prepared for. Ceres was supposed to be strong, unbreakable. The idea of her dying was impossible, like saying the sun would not rise or stone would turn to water. He found himself sitting without meaning to. The chair caught him, held him upright when his legs forgot how. "How long have you known?" "6 months. Maybe more." I ignored the signs at first, thought it was exhaustion, thought it would pass. But it got worse. And when I finally saw someone who knew what they were looking at, they told me the truth. "This is not something you recover from. This is something you manage until you cannot anymore." Her voice was steady, matter of fact, like she was discussing the weather or crop yields. But her hands betrayed her. They twisted in her lap, knuckles white. Valor's mind raced. There had to be healers, treatments, something. He ruled an empire. He had resources. He could fix this. Ceres watched him think, watched the desperation build in his eyes. "Do not do that." "Do what?" "Try to save me. I have been to every healer between here and the northern wastes. I have tried medicines that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime. There is no cure. There is only time. And I am using what I have left to make sure Kael and Lyra do not spend the rest of their lives wondering who they are." Valor stood, moved to the window, looked out at gardens that had not changed in 16 years. Everything in this palace stayed the same, preserved, frozen. While outside these walls, the world moved and shifted and took things away without asking permission. "You should have come back sooner." His voice was rough. Ceres stood, moved beside him, close enough that he could feel the heat of her body. "Would you have believed me 16 years ago? 10? 5? Would you have looked at me and seen the truth? Or would you have seen a woman trying to manipulate you with children who might not even be yours?" He wanted to say he would have believed, wanted to claim that trust, but they both knew it would be a lie. 16 years ago, he was drowning in paranoia and control. He would have tested the children, demanded proof, treated her like a threat instead of the woman he had loved. She knew it too. That was the worst part. She knew him well enough to predict his every response. "You are right. I would not have believed. Thank you for the honesty. It is more than I expected." They stood side by side, looking out at a world that kept spinning regardless of their pain. The children. "They know?" About the disease? Yes. I do not lie to them. Cannot afford to. They need to be ready for what comes after I am gone. After. The word was a cliff edge. Veilor turned to look at her. Really look at her. Tried to see past the present moment to the girl she had been, the woman she became. The force of nature that had walked into his court last night and shattered his carefully constructed reality. I searched for you, he said it again. Needed her to understand. I know. Then why did you not let me find you? Because you were searching for the wrong reasons. You were searching because losing me made you look weak, because the court whispered, because a king does not tolerate loose ends, but you were not searching because you loved me. And I was not going to come back to a man who saw me as a problem to solve instead of a person to cherish. The accusation hung between them, true and terrible. Veilor's jaw clenched. You do not know what it was like. The court after you left. The whispers, the challenges. Every day someone testing to see if I would break. Every night alone in rooms that still smelled like you. I hardened because hardening was survival. Because showing weakness would have gotten me killed. And pushing away everyone who cared about you kept you safe, kept you strong. Look at yourself, Veilor. You built a kingdom of ice and you are freezing to death inside it. Her words cut because they were true. He had built exactly what she described. A place where nothing warm could survive. Where trust was weakness and love was a liability. What do you want from me? His voice was barely above a whisper. Ceres reached up, touched his face, palm against his cheek. The first time she had touched him gently since returning. He almost pulled away. Almost. But he was so tired of pulling away. I want you to be the man I married, the one who felt things, who fought for what mattered, who did not let fear turn him into stone. That man is dead. No. He is just buried. Under 16 years of armor and ice and lies you told yourself to survive. But he is still there. I saw him last night when you looked at our children. Saw him this morning when I told you I was dying. You still feel Veilor, you just do not know how to anymore. He turned his face into her hand. Just slightly. Just enough to admit the truth without saying it aloud. The door burst open. Kyle stood there, chest heaving, eyes wide. Mother, father, you need to come, now. Veilor's hand dropped to his dagger. Ceres stepped toward her son. What is it? There is a man in the Great Hall. He says he has proof. Proof about what happened 16 years ago. Proof about why Mother left. Veilor and Ceres exchanged a glance. Something passed between them. An understanding. Whatever came next, they would face it together. They moved through the corridors like a storm building. Kael led. Lyra joined them from a side passage, falling into step beside her brother. United. A family that had never been whole now moving as one unit. The great hall was packed. Every noble in the palace had assembled. They stood in clusters, whispering, watching the doors. When Veilor entered, the whispers stopped. When Ceres entered beside him, not behind him, but beside him as an equal, the silence became absolute. In the center of the hall stood a figure, old, bent, dressed in robes that might have been fine once, but now were travel-worn and faded. His face was a map of wrinkles and scars. His eyes were sharp. Veilor moved to the throne but did not sit, stood beside it. Ceres took her place on his left. The twins flanked them. A united front. Speak. The old man bowed. It was respectful but not subservient. My name is Torion. I was once chief advisor to your father, King Valeris. I served this house for 40 years before I retired to the northern provinces. I have come because I can no longer remain silent about what I know. Lord Kalix stepped forward from the crowd. This man is delusional. He has been living in isolation for decades. His mind is... Veilor held up a hand. Kalix stopped talking. Continue. Torion's gaze swept the hall, landed on faces, lingered on Kalix, moved on. 16 years ago, Queen Ceres left the palace in the middle of the night. The story that spread was one of shame, barrenness, failure. But that was a lie I helped construct. The hall erupted, nobles shouting questions, demanding explanations. Veilor's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Silence. They fell quiet. Torion continued. I was approached by members of the court who feared the queen's influence. She was too strong, too clever, too beloved by the people. They saw her as a threat to their own power, so they crafted a plan. Spread rumors, poisoned the king's mind against her, made it impossible for her to stay without risking her life and the lives of the children she carried. Valor felt ice form in his veins, not the ice of control, the ice of rage. Who? Torian's finger rose, pointed directly at Lord Calix. Him. He orchestrated it all, with help from others who have since died or disappeared. But he was the architect, the one who whispered in your ear, Your Majesty, who suggested that a barren queen was a liability, who pushed you toward coldness and distance until Cerys had no choice but to flee. Calix's face went pale, then red. He sputtered, "This is madness. I have served this throne faithfully for—" "Have you?" Torian's voice was cold. "Or have you served yourself? Positioning allies, removing threats, building your own power base while the king stood isolated and alone?" Valor moved, descended from the throne, each step deliberate, each step bringing him closer to Calix. The man backed away, hands raised. "Your Majesty, please, you cannot believe this senile old fool." Valor stopped inches from him, looked into eyes that had looked back at him for 16 years, eyes he had trusted, relied on, believed. "Prove him wrong." "What?" "Prove him wrong. Give me evidence that you did not do what he claims. Show me loyalty. Show me truth." Calix opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came, because there were no words. Guilt was written across his face in letters 10 feet tall. Valor's hand moved faster than thought, grabbed Calix by the throat, lifted him. The man's feet left the ground. His hands clawed at Valor's wrist, but it was like clawing at iron. "You took 16 years from me. 16 years I could have had with my wife, with my children. You poisoned my mind, made me doubt, made me weak. And for what? Power? Position?" Calix's face turned purple. His eyes bulged. Valor felt the life in him, felt how easy it would be to squeeze just a little harder and end it. Cerys's voice cut through the red haze. "Valor, not like this." He did not look at her, could not look away from the man who had destroyed his life. Why not? He deserves death. Yes, he does. But not from rage. Not from pain. From justice. Make him confess. Make him tell everyone what he did. Then let the law decide. The law. Civilization. Order. The things that separated kings from tyrants. The things Valor had spent his entire reign trying to maintain, even when every instinct screamed to just burn it all down and rule through fear alone. He dropped Calix. The man collapsed, gasped for air. Valor's voice was iron. "Speak. Tell them what you did. Every word, every lie. Or I will make your death last days." Calix looked up, saw death in Valor's eyes, and broke. The words spilled out. The conspiracy. The lies. The systematic campaign to destroy Cerys's reputation and drive her from the palace. How they had planted evidence of infertility. How they had bribed healers to give false reports. How they had whispered poison in Valor's ear night after night until he believed his own wife was plotting against him. The hall listened in horrified silence. Every word was a nail in coffins. Not just Calix's coffin. The coffins of everyone who had been complicit. Everyone who had stood by and watched it happen. When he finished, Valor looked at Torian. Why now? Why come forward after all these years? Torian's expression was grim. Because I am dying, and I will not meet my end with this sin on my soul. I helped create the lie. The least I can do is help destroy it. Valor turned to the assembled court. Calix and any who aided him will be tried. Evidence will be gathered. Justice will be served. This I swear. He looked at Cerys. She stood tall despite everything, despite the disease eating her from inside, despite 16 years of exile, despite all of it. You were right about everything. I am sorry. The words felt inadequate, felt too small to carry the weight of what he needed to say, but they were all he had. Cerys's eyes softened. I know. Guards moved forward, took Calix into custody. The man did not resist. He was broken, finished, his power shattered in a single morning. The court began to disperse, slowly, reluctantly, like they could not quite believe what they had witnessed. Valor stood in the center of the hall, Cerys beside him, the twins flanking them. A family. Finally. After 16 years. But it was too late. That was the cruel joke. He finally had the truth, finally understood what had been taken from him. And Cerys was dying. Time. The one enemy even kings could not defeat. Kael spoke quietly. What happens now? Valor looked at his son, at eyes that mirrored his own. Now we rebuild. We take what is left and we make it into something better, something true. Lyra's voice was hard. And the ones who helped Calyx, what about them? They will answer for their crimes. All of them. No mercy. No exceptions. It was a promise, and Valor always kept his promises. The family moved together toward the private chambers, away from the court, away from the eyes and whispers, toward something resembling peace. But peace was a luxury, and Valor was beginning to understand that he had spent 16 years choosing security over truth, control over love, power over connection. In his chambers, alone for a moment while Cerys settled the twins, Valor looked at his reflection in polished steel, saw a man who had aged beyond his years, saw the cost of being king written in lines and scars and eyes that had forgotten how to soften. Cerys entered without knocking. She never had knocked. It was one of the things he had loved about her, the way she moved through his space like she belonged there. Because she did. They will want blood. The court. The people. They will want Calyx and everyone involved executed publicly. Let them want. Justice is not the same as vengeance. Since when do you believe that? Since I realized that vengeance is what got me here. Alone. Bitter. Half dead inside. Maybe it is time to try something different. Cerys moved closer. They stood facing each other. Two people who had been everything to each other once and then nothing and now something undefined and fragile. I have perhaps a year, maybe less. What are we going to do with it? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Valor reached out, took her hand, felt the warmth of her skin, the pulse in her wrist. Proof of life. Proof she was real and here and not a ghost or a dream. Everything. We are going to do everything we should have done 16 years ago. We are going to be a family. We are going to teach our children what it means to rule without losing yourself. We are going to burn down every lie and build something true in its place. And when I am gone, when you are gone, I will raise them the way you would want. I will teach them strength and mercy, power and compassion. I will make sure they know who you were, what you sacrificed, what you meant. His voice broke on the last word. He did not try to hide it. Cerys smiled. It was sad and beautiful and real. That is all I wanted to hear. She leaned forward, pressed her forehead against his. They stood like that, breathing the same air, existing in the same moment. For the first time in 16 years, Valor felt something other than ice in his chest. It was not happiness. Not yet. But it was possibility. And possibility was more than he had had in a very long time. Outside, night was falling. Inside, a family that had been shattered was slowly, painfully, beginning to piece itself back together. But in the shadows of the palace, in corners where torchlight did not reach, other forces were moving. Calyx had been the architect, but he was not the only player. There were others who had invested too much in the lie to let the truth survive, and they were not finished, not by a long way. 3 weeks passed like fever dreams. Valor watched Cerys move through the palace with the twins, watched her teach them the pathways of power she had learned in exile, watched her grow paler each day, the disease carving hollows under her eyes that no amount of rest could fill. He pretended not to notice. She pretended not to be dying. They both knew the truth. They both ignored it because acknowledging it meant admitting time was running out. The court had fractured exactly as Valor predicted. Half stood with the returned queen. Half whispered that Calyx's confession was coerced, that the old advisor Torian was senile, that this entire situation was a power play designed to destabilize the throne. Valor crushed dissent where he found it. Exiled 3 noble families, stripped 2 others of their lands, made examples that were brutal and public and necessary. Because in the Game of Thrones, hesitation was death. And he had hesitated once before, had let doubt poison his mind, had let Ceres walk away. He would not make that mistake again. But power is a strange thing. The tighter you grip it, the more it slips through your fingers. Valor was learning this lesson in real time, watching his empire hold together through sheer force of will, while cracks spread beneath the surface like ice breaking on a frozen lake. He stood in the council chamber now, listening to reports from the eastern provinces. Grain shipments, tax collections, troop movements, the mundane machinery of empire that ground on regardless of personal catastrophe. Lord Harith spoke, a minor noble who had risen through competence rather than birth, one of the few men Vaelor actually trusted. The Eastern lords are restless, Your Majesty. They question the succession. Wonder if the twins are truly prepared to rule should something happen to you. Vaelor's eyes were ice. The twins are my blood. They will rule when I'm gone. Any who question this are welcome to say so directly to my face. Harith bowed his head. Of course, Your Majesty. I merely report what I hear, and I appreciate your honesty. Continue. The meeting dragged on. Hours of details that needed attention, decisions that needed making. Vaelor handled it all with the mechanical precision of a man who had done this 10,000 times. But part of his mind was elsewhere, with Ceres, with the children, with the strange new reality of having a family after 16 years of isolation. When the council finally dismissed, Vaelor remained seated, stared at maps spread across the table. His empire, every border, every city, every piece of territory won through blood and strategy and ruthless calculation. It should have meant something, should have filled the hollow spaces inside him. It did not. The door opened without warning. Lyra entered, moving with the unconscious grace of youth and training. She had Ceres's walk, confident, purposeful, like the ground existed to be walked on by her and no one else. Father, Mother sent me to find you. Dinner is ready. Father. The word still felt foreign in his mouth when he tried to use it. Foreign, but not unwelcome. He stood, followed his daughter through corridors that suddenly felt less empty. This was new, the sensation of having someone waiting, of belonging somewhere other than a throne made of obligation and ice. They ate in the family chambers, a small table, 4 chairs, food that was simple rather than ceremonial. Ceres had insisted. Said that if they only had months, she was not spending them drowning in state dinners and political theater. Kael spoke between bites of bread and meat. The guards are teaching me sword work. I am getting better. Vaelor glanced at him. The boy had his build, broad shoulders, strong hands, born to fight. Good. A ruler who cannot defend himself is a target. Ceres's voice cut in, sharp. A ruler who only knows how to fight is a brute. Make sure you are learning strategy too, politics, how to read people. Kael nodded. The exchange was natural, easy. Parents teaching their child. It should not have felt revolutionary, but it did. Because Vaelor had never had this. Never sat at a table with his own father and discussed anything beyond tactics and duty. Lyra spoke next. Her voice was quieter than her brother's, but no less intense. There are nobles who will not accept us. I hear them whispering. Vaelor set down his cup. Let them whisper. Words are just noise. What matters is power, and power recognizes power. You are mine. That makes you untouchable, unless something happens to you. The girl's eyes were steady, unflinching. She was not asking a question. She was stating a fact. Ceres reached across the table, took her daughter's hand. Which is why you are learning everything you can now, so that if the worst happens, you and your brother can hold this empire together without him. Vaelor felt something twist in his chest. Pride, maybe. Or fear. Or the terrible recognition that these children were stronger than he had been at their age. Stronger because Ceres had raised them to be. Raised them in exile with nothing but survival as a teacher. The meal continued. Small talk. Plans. Strategies. A family functioning like families were supposed to function. And for the first time in his life, Vaelor understood what he had been missing. Not just a partner, not just heirs, but connection. The kind that came from shared meals and shared burdens, and the quiet trust of people who knew your worst parts and chose to stay anyway. Later, after the twins had retired, Vaelor and Ceres stood on the balcony of her chambers. The same balcony where he had stood 3 weeks ago watching rain fall and contemplating control. Now she stood beside him, their shoulders almost touching. Almost. You are good with them. Her voice was soft. Valor shook his head. I am learning, slowly. You did all the hard work. I just showed up at the end. Better late than never. Is it? Or is it just cruel? To finally have this and know it is temporary? Saris turned to face him. Her hand rose, touched his jaw, forced him to look at her. Everything is temporary, Valor. Power, empires, life. The question is not how long you have. It is what you do with the time you are given. Philosophical words, true words, but they did not make it hurt less. He pulled her close. She came without resistance. They stood like that, wrapped in each other. Two people who had been torn apart by lies and brought back together by truth. Her heartbeat was steady against his chest. Proof of life, proof that she was still here, still fighting. I do not know how to do this. His voice was rough. Do what? Love someone who is dying. Watch you fade, pretend everything is normal when I can see the disease eating you alive. Then do not pretend. Just be here. Be present. That is all I want. All I have ever wanted. It sounded simple. It was the hardest thing he had ever been asked to do. They went inside, lay together in darkness. No words, just breathing, just the warmth of another body, just the temporary comfort of not being alone. Vialor did not sleep, could not sleep. His mind raced with calculations and contingencies. What would happen when Saris died? How to secure the twins? How to prevent the court from tearing itself apart? How to maintain control when the only thing keeping him human was about to disappear? Dawn came too fast. Always did when you spent the night dreading it. Valor rose, dressed, kissed Saris's forehead while she still slept. She looked peaceful like this, younger, like the girl he had married before crowns and conspiracies had hardened them both into weapons. He left her sleeping. Moved through empty corridors toward the council chamber. Another day. Another series of battles disguised as governance. But something was wrong. He felt it before he saw it. A change in the air, a tension that had not been there yesterday. Guards stood at odd intervals. Their eyes tracked him differently, not with respect, with calculation. Valor's hand dropped to his dagger. He kept walking, kept his pace steady, showed nothing, but every instinct screamed danger. He reached the council chamber. The doors stood open. Inside, the entire court had assembled, not just council members. Everyone, every noble, every official, every person of influence in the palace. And at the head of the table, where Valor should have been standing, was Torian, the old advisor who had exposed Kylix, who had spoken truth when it mattered, who had seemed like an ally. He was not smiling now. His face was grave, determined, and beside him stood a woman Valor had never seen before. Tall, pale, with eyes that reflected light like a cat's. Valor stopped in the doorway, did not enter. Survival instinct told him to hold the exit, to not let himself be surrounded. Torian spoke. His voice carried through the chamber. King Valor, thank you for joining us. We have much to discuss. Valor's voice was flat. What is this? This is truth, Your Majesty. The real truth. Not the convenient story I told 3 weeks ago. Ice formed in Valor's veins. Not the ice of control, the ice of dread. Explain. Now. Torian gestured to the woman beside him. This is Morel. She is what the old texts call a shapeshifter, a creature of magic and deception, and 16 years ago she was the one who took Queen Saris's form and destroyed your marriage. The words hit like hammer blows. Valor's mind raced, tried to process, tried to understand. The woman Morel spoke. Her voice was musical. Wrong. Like someone had learned to mimic human speech without understanding the emotion behind it. I was hired by members of the court. My task was simple. Wear the queen's face. Act in ways that would turn the king against her. Create doubt, suspicion. Drive a wedge between them that could never be repaired. Valor's hand tightened on his dagger. Lies. Kylix confessed. He admitted everything. Torian's expression was sad. He confessed to what I told him to confess. I fed him the words, made him believe it was his own guilt talking. But the truth is darker. Kylix was a pawn. A convenient scapegoat. The real conspiracy runs deeper. The room was silent. Every eye on Valor, watching, waiting, measuring his reaction. Valor felt the ground shifting beneath him. This was a coup. Had to be. Some elaborate play to destabilize him while he was vulnerable, while he was distracted by Ceres and the twins. But why reveal a shapeshifter? Why construct this elaborate lie about magic and deception unless there was truth underneath? Prove it. His voice was stone. Morel smiled. It was not a human smile. Gladly. She changed, not slowly, not dramatically. One moment she was herself. The next she wore Ceres's face, Ceres's body, Ceres's voice. Hello, Valor. Do you remember me? Do you remember the night I told you I was leaving, the coldness in my eyes? That was not your wife. That was me. Valor's world tilted. He remembered that night, remembered every detail burned into his memory like a brand. The way Ceres had looked at him with such contempt, such finality, like he was nothing, less than nothing. If this creature was telling the truth, that moment had been a lie, a performance designed to break him. And it had worked. Morel shifted back to her own form. Torian continued speaking. The conspiracy was not Calyx's. It was mine. I orchestrated everything, the rumors, the manipulation, the systematic destruction of your marriage, and I did it for a very simple reason. Why? The word was barely a whisper. Because you were weak. Because you let emotion cloud your judgment. Because you put love before duty, and the Empire suffered for it. Your father understood this. He ruled with iron and ice. You were supposed to be the same. But Ceres made you soft, made you vulnerable. So I removed her. Valor's rage was a living thing. It filled him, consumed him. He moved before thought, dagger in hand, crossing the distance between himself and Torian in 3 strides. But guards blocked him, 10 of them, all wearing his colors, all sworn to protect him, all now standing between him and the man who had destroyed his life. Torian's voice was calm. I did not do this out of malice, Your Majesty. I did it to save the Empire, to make you into the king you needed to be. And I succeeded. Look at what you built. Look at the strength of your rule. All of it forged in the fire of loss. Valor struggled against the guards. They held firm. He was strong, but not strong enough to fight 10 trained soldiers. You took everything from me. I gave you everything. I gave you an empire. I gave you power. I gave you the hardness necessary to rule. What did Ceres give you? Children who were hidden away. Weakness disguised as love. Distraction from your true purpose. Valor went still. Not from acceptance, from calculation. Fighting was pointless. The guards had him. Half the court was watching. This was planned, orchestrated. A reveal designed to happen exactly like this. He forced his voice to stay level. What do you want? Torian smiled. I want what I have always wanted, a strong empire, a strong king, and that means removing the weakness that has returned to infect your rule. Ceres. The name was a stone dropped into still water. Torian nodded. She must go. The children must be sent away. You must return to what you were, what you should be. Never. The word was absolute. Then you forced my hand. Torian gestured. More guards entered. These were not palace guards. These wore no colors at all. Mercenaries. Bought and paid for. They moved through the palace with purpose. Valor watched through the doorway as they spread out, searching, hunting, for Ceres, for the twins. Valor's rage exploded. You dare threaten my family! They are not your family. They are a liability, a weakness you cannot afford. This is for the good of the Empire, Valor. In time you will understand. I will kill you. I will burn this entire palace to the ground and make sure you die screaming. Torian's expression was patient, like a teacher dealing with a stubborn child. No, you will not. Because if you resist, they die. Ceres, Kael, Lyra, all of them. But if you cooperate, they will be exiled, sent far away where they can live out their days in peace. It is a mercy, more than they deserve. Mercy. The word was poison in Valor's ears. This is the moment. This is the choice every man faces when pushed to the edge. Submit or fight. Survive by compromise or die by principle. The kind of decision that defines what you are at your core. Vaelor had spent 16 years choosing survival, choosing control, choosing to harden himself into something that could not be broken. And where had it gotten him? Here, held by his own guards, watching his family hunted by mercenaries, powerless despite the crown on his head. All that power, all that control. And it meant nothing when the people you trusted were the ones holding the knives. This is what betrayal teaches, that loyalty is conditional, that trust is a luxury, that even kings are vulnerable to the schemes of smaller men with patient plans. But Vaelor was not just a king. He was a father now, a husband, a man who had finally rediscovered what it meant to feel something other than ice, and that changed everything. The doors behind Torian burst open. Ceres stood there, flanked by Kyle and Lyra. They were armed, dressed for battle, and behind them stood a dozen guards, the ones who had remained loyal, the ones who remembered what the court had been like when Ceres walked its halls. Ceres's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. "You made a mistake, Torian." The old man turned. His expression flickered, surprise, then calculation. "Queen Ceres, how unfortunate. I had hoped to spare you this confrontation." "Spare me? You orchestrated the destruction of my marriage, stole 16 years of my life, and now you threaten my children. There is nothing you could do that would spare me anything." She moved forward. The guards with her moved in formation, trained, coordinated. These were soldiers who had fought beside her in exile, who owed her loyalty that ran deeper than gold or titles. The mercenaries Torian had brought moved to intercept. The chamber filled with the sound of steel on steel. Guards loyal to Vaelor broke free of whatever hold Torian had over them, joined the fight. The council chamber became a battlefield. Vaelor used the chaos, slammed his elbow into the face of the nearest guard holding him, felt bone crunch, grabbed the man's sword, spun, cut down two more before they could react. He fought his way toward Ceres, toward the twins, toward the only things that mattered. Morel the shapeshifter changed, became something else, something with too many limbs and teeth like broken glass. She moved through the fighting like water, killed 3 men before Lyra intercepted her. The girl fought with a savagery that made Vaelor's heart stop. Where had she learned to fight like that? From Ceres. From 16 years of survival in places where weakness meant death. Kale fought beside his sister. They moved in perfect synchronization, a unit, covering each other, protecting each other, the way siblings did when they had only ever had each other. Vaelor reached Ceres. Back to back they fought, like they had done once before, a lifetime ago, when they were young and the world was simpler. Her voice reached him over the clash of combat. "I told you I would not die in exile." He almost laughed. Almost. "I am starting to understand why. Because dying in battle is better? Because dying beside you is better than living without you." The words came out without thought. Raw. True. Everything he had spent 16 years trying not to feel. Torian screamed orders, his careful plan unraveling. The mercenaries broke. Ran. They had been paid for a simple job, not a war. Morel fought on, but she was one creature against dozens. Lyra's blade found something vital. The shapeshifter screamed. It was not a human sound. She collapsed, changed back to her original form, died there on marble floors that had seen too much blood. The fighting stopped. Bodies littered the floor. Some wore palace colors. Some wore nothing. All were equally dead. Torian stood alone, surrounded, his plan destroyed. Vaelor approached slowly, sword still in hand, blood dripping from the blade. "You wanted to make me strong, make me hard, make me into my father." Torian's chin lifted. "Yes. Then know this, my father died alone, hated by his children, feared by his court, respected by none who knew him. That is the legacy of ice. That is the price of refusing to feel. I will not pay it. You are weak. No, I am human. There is a difference." Vaelor's blade rose, fell. It was quick. Cleaner than the old man deserved, but Vaelor was tired of cruelty, tired of games, tired of everything except the people standing behind him. The court was silent. Those who had survived watched with wide eyes, waiting, wondering what came next. Vaelor turned to face them, sword still bloody, crown still on his head. But something had changed, something fundamental. Here is the new order. Cerys is queen. Kael and Lyra are heirs. Any who dispute this can leave now. Those who stay swear loyalty not just to me but to them, to all of us, as a family, as a unit. He let the silence stretch. Choose. Some left, not many, most stayed, because power was still power, and Vaelor still held it. But now he held it differently, not as a man alone on a throne, but as part of something larger. The chamber cleared, bodies were removed, blood was washed from stones, the machinery of empire ground on. In the private chambers, Vaelor cleaned his sword while Cerys tended to wounds. The twins sat nearby, quiet, processing what they had seen, what they had done. Kael spoke first. Is it always like this? Ruling? Vaelor looked at his son. Sometimes. Not always, but often enough that you need to be ready for it. Lyra's voice was harder. And if we are not ready? What then? Then you learn. Or you die. Those are the only options. Harsh words, true words. Cerys finished bandaging his arm, sat beside him. They did well today. Yes, they did. Pride. It was an unfamiliar emotion, but Vaelor was learning to recognize it, learning to let himself feel it without immediately crushing it as weakness. You should rest, all of you. Her voice was tired. Vaelor looked at her, really looked, saw how pale she had become, how the fight had cost her. The disease was winning, slowly but inevitably. You should rest too. I will, soon. There is still too much to do. Always. There was always too much to do. That was the nature of empire, of power, of responsibility. It never ended. Never gave you space to breathe, just kept demanding more until there was nothing left to give. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the measure of a person was not what they accomplished when they had everything, but what they did when they had nothing left, when survival was no longer the goal and legacy became the only currency that mattered. Vaelor stood, moved to the balcony, looked out over his empire, his cage, his burden, his crown. Cerys joined him, stood close enough that their shoulders touched. What are you thinking? That I spent 16 years becoming something I am not, something I thought I needed to be. And in the process, I lost the only things that actually mattered. And now I have them back, for however long time allows. And that will have to be enough. It was not enough, would never be enough. But it was all he had. Cerys' head leaned against his shoulder, a gesture of trust, of intimacy, of connection that could not be faked or forced. The empire will survive without you, Vaelor. That is the truth no king wants to hear. But it is true. Empires outlast emperors, thrones outlast kings. What matters is not how long you rule, but what you leave behind. And what am I leaving behind? Children who know how to love and fight in equal measure. A kingdom that is stronger for having survived chaos. A legacy built on truth instead of lies. Lofty words, beautiful words, probably even true words. But standing on that balcony, looking at an empire held together by force and fear and the sheer stubborn will of a man who refused to break, Vaelor understood something fundamental. He was not strong because he was hard. He was hard because he was afraid. Afraid of loss. Afraid of vulnerability. Afraid of becoming his father. And that fear had driven every decision for 16 years. Had shaped him into something cold and distant and powerful and utterly alone, until Cerys came back, until the truth shattered the lies, until he was forced to choose between the king he had become and the man he used to be. And the worst part, the part that terrified him more than any blade or conspiracy or shapeshifter, was that he still did not know which one would survive. The palace did not sleep that night. How could it? Blood still stained the council chamber floors despite 3 washings. Bodies had been carried out, but their absence screamed louder than their presence ever had. The court whispered in corners, schemes reforming like water finding new channels after a dam breaks. Power abhors a vacuum, and Torian's death had created one massive enough to swallow kingdoms. Vaelor stood in the armory, methodically checking weapons he had not touched in years. Sword, dagger, short blade for close work. He moved with the mechanical precision of a man preparing for war, because that was exactly what this was. War. Not the kind fought on open fields with banners and glory, the kind fought in shadows and corridors, where victory meant survival and defeat meant everyone you loved died screaming. The door opened. Cerise entered without announcement. She never announced herself. Still moved through his spaces like they were hers, because they were. Had always been, even when he pretended otherwise. You are planning something, not a question, an observation. Valor did not look up from the blade he was sharpening. Torian was not working alone. He could not have been. The mercenaries, the guards who turned, the coordination required. There are others, and they will move soon. How soon? Tonight. Maybe tomorrow. They will not wait. Cannot wait. The moment we expose the conspiracy, we started a clock. Either we root them out or they strike first. Ceres moved closer, took the whetstone from his hand, forced him to look at her. Then we root them out. Together. You should not be fighting. The disease is killing me regardless. I can die in bed wasting away, or I can die doing something that matters. I choose the second option. Her voice was iron. The same voice that had commanded loyalty in exile, that had raised 2 children in places where softness meant death. This was not the young queen who had fled 16 years ago. This was a woman forged in fire and loss, and the terrible clarity that came from knowing your time was measured in months, not years. Valor's jaw clenched. Every instinct screamed to protect her, lock her somewhere safe, keep her away from blades and blood and the brutal mathematics of combat. But she was right. Keeping her safe meant watching her die slowly, and Ceres had never done anything slowly in her life. Fine. But you stay with me. No heroics. No sacrifices. I will make the same deal with you. They both knew it was a lie. When the moment came, when the choice presented itself between self-preservation and protecting the ones you loved, there was no choice at all. There was only instinct. And instinct did not calculate odds or consider consequences. It just moved. This is what separates the survivors from the dead. Not strength, not skill, but the willingness to pay prices others refuse to consider, to cross lines that should not be crossed, to become the monster the situation requires and live with what that makes you afterward. Kael and Lyra entered together. They moved in sync now, the way soldiers did after enough battles, reading each other's movements without needing words. Valor saw himself in them, saw Ceres, saw something else too, something neither parent possessed alone but together had created, a kind of focused intensity that made them dangerous beyond their years. Kael spoke first. His voice had deepened in the weeks since arriving. No longer a boy, not quite a man, something in between that was more lethal than either. We found 3 more, guards who were taking orders from Torian. They talked. The word was casual, but Valor heard what it meant. Interrogation, the kind that left marks. His son had crossed that line already, learned that sometimes information was more valuable than mercy, and mercy was a luxury you could not afford. What did they say? Lyra answered. Her voice was colder than her brother's, more controlled. She would be the dangerous one when they were older, the one who calculated while Kael burned. There is a group, 12 nobles, maybe 15. They meet in the old wine cellars beneath the east wing, tonight, 2 hours past midnight. They are planning to strike at dawn, kill you, kill Mother, take us hostage and force a regency. Standard coup mechanics, remove the head, control the heirs, legitimize the seizure through procedure and law. It would have worked too if Torian had not revealed himself too early, if he had waited another month, another week even, but he had not waited, and that impatience was going to get him killed. Would have gotten him killed if Valor had not already put a sword through his throat. How many guards do we trust? Ceres answered this time. 20. Maybe 30. Not enough for a frontal assault. Too many for stealth. Then we do neither. Valor moved to the table, spread out a map of the palace, marked the wine cellars, the approaches, the exits. We do not go to them. We bring them to us, force them to move before they are ready, make them expose themselves. How? By giving them what they want, a target, an opportunity they cannot refuse. Hale leaned over the map, studied it with eyes too young to have seen as much combat as they clearly had. You want to use yourself as bait? Yes. That is insane. Probably. But it will work. Lyra's expression was skeptical. They will bring everything. Every loyal guard. Every hired blade. You will be outnumbered 20-1. Valor smiled. It was not a kind expression. Then the odds are almost fair. This is the mathematics of violence. Numbers matter, but they are not everything. Training matters. Experience matters. But what matters most is commitment. The willingness to do whatever is necessary without hesitation or doubt. 100 men who hesitate will lose to 10 who do not, and Valor had spent 16 years learning not to hesitate. The plan was simple, brutal, the kind of strategy that worked because it was too direct to be anticipated. Valor would appear in the throne room alone at midnight, send away his guards, make himself vulnerable. The conspirators would move, had to move. An opportunity like that was too perfect to ignore. And when they came, they would find not a vulnerable king, but a trap built from steel and blood, and the focused fury of a family that had already lost too much to lose anything more. Midnight approached like an executioner, slow, inevitable. Valor dressed in simple clothes, no armor, no crown, just a man and the weapons he carried. Cerys did the same. The twins checked their blades with the casual familiarity of people who had lived with violence so long it became routine. They did not speak. What was there to say? They all knew what came next, knew the odds, knew that some of them might not survive the night. But knowing and accepting were different things. Acceptance required a kind of peace with mortality that most people never achieved. Valor had made his peace years ago. Had to. You could not rule an empire while fearing death. Fear made you cautious. Caution made you weak. Weakness invited the exact fate you feared. The throne room waited, empty, silent, torches burning low. Valor walked to the center, stood there, made himself a target. Cerys and the twins were hidden in the shadows. 20 loyal guards positioned at key points, enough to turn the tide once the fighting started, but not enough to prevent it from starting. This had to look real, had to feel like an opportunity. The minutes crawled. Valor counted his heartbeats, listened to the palace breathing around him, stone and silence and the weight of centuries. How many kings had stood here? How many had survived? The throne was old, older than the empire, built by hands that turned to dust generations ago. It would outlast him too, would outlast his children and their children. That was the nature of power. It endured while people burned bright and brief and disappeared like sparks from a fire. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving with purpose but not rushing, trying to be quiet and failing because groups never move quietly. Too many feet. Too many people thinking about their own silence instead of the collective sound. They entered from 3 directions. Not 12 nobles, not 15. 20 at least. All armed. All wearing expressions that ranged from determination to barely concealed terror. Leading them was Lady Morgessa. Of course it was. The woman he had cast aside for Cerys. The woman whose family stood to lose everything if the succession changed. She stopped 10 paces from him. Her sword was drawn but held low. Not an immediate threat. Not yet. Her voice carried through the chamber. You should have accepted my offer, Valor. Should have married me. Secured the southern ports. Maintained stability. Instead you chose sentiment over strategy. Chose a dying woman and bastard children over the good of the empire. Bastard children. The words were designed to provoke, to make him angry. Angry men made mistakes. Valor did not take the bait. They are my blood. That makes them legitimate. The only bastards here are the ones who betray their oaths. Morgessa's expression hardened. Oaths are tools. They bind the weak. The strong remake the world to fit their vision. Torian understood that. He was weak in execution but right in principle. You need to be hard, need to be ice, but you have gone soft. Let love corrupt you, and that makes you a liability. She raised her sword. This is not personal, Valor. This is necessity. Everything is personal. Anyone who claims otherwise is lying to themselves. Morgessa smiled. Perhaps, but it changes nothing. She gestured. The nobles moved forward. 20 armed men and women converging on one target. The math was simple, overwhelming. Absolute. Valor did not move, did not draw his weapon, just stood there waiting. This was the moment, the pause before violence, the breath between heartbeats, time stretched like glass about to shatter. Then it shattered. Cerys emerged from shadow like a ghost given form. Her blade took the nearest noble through the throat before he registered her presence. Kael and Lyra came from opposite sides, moving in perfect coordination, each taking a target, each strike clean and efficient and final. The 20 loyal guards revealed themselves. No warning, no announcement, just sudden violence erupting from positions carefully chosen to create maximum chaos and minimum escape routes. The conspirators broke. Not all of them, but enough. The difference between soldiers and nobles playing at war was that soldiers trained for chaos, nobles trained for ceremony. When formation shattered and plans dissolved, one group adapted and the other died. Valor moved, finally, drew his blade and became what he had spent 16 years perfecting. Not a king, a weapon. Every movement practiced 10,000 times until it was instinct rather than thought. He cut through the chaos like a shark through bloody water. Efficient, brutal, necessary. Morgesa fought well, better than expected. She had clearly spent her time in exile learning more than politics. Her blade met his 3 times before he found an opening. Exploited it. She fell hard, blood spreading across marble that had seen too much of it already. She looked up at him, not with hatred, with something like respect. You always were better at this than pretending to be civilized. He could have responded, could have said something meaningful, or cutting, or final. But words were wasted on the dying. He moved on, searched for the next threat. The fighting was brutal and brief, 10 minutes that felt like hours. When it ended, bodies littered the floor. Most wore the colors of noble houses. Some wore palace guard uniforms. A few wore nothing at all, hired blades with no loyalty beyond gold. Valor found Cerys. She was breathing hard, blood on her blade and her clothes, but none of it seemed to be hers. Their eyes met. A moment of recognition. We survived. Again. Kael and Lyra stood back to back, both uninjured, both covered in other people's blood. They looked older somehow, like the last hour had added years. This is what violence does. It ages you. Not slowly over time, but in sudden jumps. Each fight, each kill, each moment where you choose to take life rather than lose your own. It marks you in ways that have nothing to do with scars, changes something fundamental in how you see the world and your place in it. The loyal guards were checking bodies, making sure the dead stayed dead. It was grim work, but necessary. Valor had seen men thought dead rise up for one final strike often enough to know you did not take chances. A sound. Wrong. Out of place. Valor's head snapped toward it. A section of wall was moving. Not a door. A hidden passage. One of the dozens that riddled the palace like termite tunnels. He had known about some of them, clearly not all. From the passage emerged more men. Not nobles, not palace guards. Professional soldiers. 30 of them. Maybe more. All wearing matched armor, all moving with the coordinated precision of a trained unit, and leading them was a face Valor recognized. Lord Hareth, the minor noble, the competent administrator. The one man Valor had thought he could trust. The betrayal hit harder than any blade. Not because Hareth mattered personally, but because Valor had thought he could read people, had spent 16 years learning to see through masks and spotlights. And he had missed this completely. Hareth's expression was apologetic, almost sad. I am sorry, Your Majesty, truly. But this is bigger than you, bigger than any of us. Bigger how? The Empire is rotting from within. You see it? I see it. Everyone sees it. The only question is whether we let it collapse slowly or tear it down and rebuild it properly. By killing me? By removing the obstacles to necessary change. You, the Queen, the children who represent a return to old failures, all of it needs to go. Violor's mind raced. They were surrounded, outnumbered, low on stamina from the fight they had just finished. The loyal guards were exhausted. Cerys was dying. The twins were skilled but young. The odds were not just bad. They were impossible. This is what failure looks like. Not a glorious last stand. Not a heroic death. Just math. Simple, brutal math that said you were going to die, and there was nothing you could do about it. Except there was always something you could do. Always one more move, one more gamble, one more price you could pay that your enemy would not. Valor looked at Ceres, at the twins, at the guards who had stayed loyal when it would have been easier to turn, at the people who mattered more than crowns or empires or the grand abstractions men killed for. He made his choice. Turned back to Hareth. You want the throne? You can have it. Let them go. Let my family walk out of here. You win. I lose. The empire is yours. Hareth actually looked surprised. You would give up everything just like that? For them? Yes. Without hesitation. And this is the moment. The point where everything that came before leads. Where all the philosophy about strength and hardness and ice meets the reality of what you actually value when forced to choose. Valor had spent 16 years believing power mattered most. That control was survival. That feeling was weakness. He had been wrong. Power meant nothing if you had no one to share it with. Control was just another cage. And feeling, the thing he had tried so hard to kill, was the only thing that made any of this worth surviving for. Hareth shook his head. A generous offer. But I cannot accept. They are loose ends, potential rallying points for resistance. They have to die. All of you. I am sorry, but there is no other way. He raised his hand, signaled the soldiers. They advanced. Ceres moved to Valor's side, pressed something into his hand, a small vial, glass, filled with liquid that shimmered in torchlight, poison, fast-acting, painless, the kind you carried when you knew capture was worse than death. Her voice was barely a whisper. If this goes wrong, if we cannot win, use it. Do not let them take you alive. Valor closed his fist around the vial, felt the glass warm against his palm. I am not dying today. Neither are you. Everyone dies eventually, not today. He did not know if he believed it, did not know if belief mattered, but he said it with such certainty that it almost became true through sheer force of will. The soldiers closed in, 30 trained killers against a handful of exhausted defenders. The math was clear, the outcome predetermined. Valor raised his sword anyway. Beside him, Ceres did the same. The twins took their positions. The loyal guards formed a circle. This was it, the moment where everything ended or everything changed, where the story either concluded in blood and silence or twisted into something new and unexpected. Hareth watched with an expression of genuine regret, like he was sorry this had to happen, even though he was the one making it happen. That was the worst kind of enemy, the kind who believed they were right, who thought they were saving the world by destroying the people in it. The soldiers raised their weapons, began the final advance, and then the walls exploded. Not metaphorically, literally. Stone and mortar detonating inward in a shower of debris and dust. Through the breach poured men, hundreds of them. Wearing armor Valor recognized, northern garrison colors, the troops who had been stationed at the border, who should have been 3 days' march away. Leading them was a woman on horseback. She rode straight through the gap in the wall into the throne room like it was the most natural thing in the world. Dismounted in a single fluid motion, pulled off her helm. Commander Rhea, the northern garrison leader. A soldier Valor had promoted 5 years ago over the objections of nobles who thought women should not lead armies. She had proven them wrong by holding the northern territories against raiders and rebels with nothing but discipline and strategic brilliance. She looked at Valor, at the scene, at Hareth's soldiers frozen in shock. Her voice cut through the silence like a whip crack. Apologies for the delay, Your Majesty. The roads were worse than expected, but we received the Queen's message and came as fast as we could. Message. Ceres. Valor glanced at her. She smiled. Tired, satisfied. Did you think I spent 16 years in exile learning nothing? I sent word 2 weeks ago. Called in favors from people who owed me, people you never knew existed. Commander Rhea turned to Hareth. Her expression was contempt wrapped in professional courtesy. Lord Hareth, you are under arrest for treason. Order your men to stand down or we will cut them down where they stand. Hareth's face went white, then red. His soldiers looked at each other, looked at the hundreds of northern troops pouring into the palace. Did the math. They dropped their weapons, smart, survival instinct overriding loyalty. This was how coups ended, Not with glorious last stands, with people deciding that living beat dying for someone else's ambition. Harith did not drop his weapon. He looked at Valor with something like disappointment. You were supposed to be alone, isolated. That was the whole point. I was alone for 16 years, and then I learned that being alone was not the same as being strong. Took me long enough, but I learned. Rhea's soldiers moved in, disarmed Harith, took him into custody. The man did not resist, just looked defeated, like the world had broken a promise it made to him. The throne room fell silent, the kind of silence that comes after storms, after the violence ends and reality reasserts itself. Bodies on the floor, blood on marble, the smell of death and dust and fear slowly dissipating. Vialor turned to Commander Rhea. Thank you, she saluted. Crisp, professional. You gave me a chance when no one else would. I do not forget debts. This is loyalty. Not the kind bought with gold or coerced through fear. The kind earned through respect and repaid through action. Valor had thought he understood loyalty, had thought it was about control and dominance. But real loyalty was different. It was mutual, chosen, given freely because someone had proven they deserved it. The loyal guards began the grim work of clearing bodies. Rhea's troops secured the palace, made sure there were no more surprises lurking in shadows. It would take hours, maybe days, but the immediate threat was over. Saris swayed, caught herself. Valor moved to her side, supported her weight. You need to rest. I will, soon, but not yet, because there was still work to do, still pieces to put back together, still an empire that needed governing and a court that needed reassuring and 1,000 details that could not wait just because people were tired and hurt and ready to collapse. Kael and Lyra stood nearby, watching, learning, seeing what ruling actually meant. Not ceremony and crowns, but this. Blood and betrayal and the grinding exhaustion of holding things together when everything wanted to fall apart. Valor met his children's eyes, saw understanding there. They got it. Understood that power was not about glory. It was about this, the aftermath, the consequences. The price you paid over and over until there was nothing left to give. Commander Rhea approached. Your Majesty, we found something in Lord Harith's quarters. Documents. Plans. This went deeper than we thought. How much deeper? She handed him papers. Valor scanned them, felt ice form in his stomach. Not the ice of control, the ice of dread. This was not just about the throne. This was about the entire empire. Multiple conspiracies, multiple factions, all working toward different goals but all requiring the same first step. Remove Valor, remove Ceres, remove anyone who might stand in the way of their particular vision of how things should be. They had won tonight, but tonight was just one battle. The war was larger, deeper, more complex than he had imagined. Valor looked at Ceres, at the twins, at Commander Rhea and the loyal guards in the palace that had become a battlefield. This is what it means to rule. Not the moments of victory, but the realization that victory is temporary, that threats never end, that you will fight until you die, and then your children will fight, and their children after that, because power is not a destination. It is a war without end, and the only question that mattered was whether you had people worth fighting beside. People who would stand with you when the odds were impossible and the costs unbearable. Valor looked at his family, at the woman dying beside him, at the children forged in exile and blood, at the soldiers who had crossed an empire to answer a call for help. He had those people. That would have to be enough, because dawn was coming, and with it, all the consequences of what they had done tonight. The nobles they had killed, the conspiracies they had exposed, the fragile peace they had shattered in pursuit of truth. The empire would fracture, would split into factions, would test them in ways tonight's battle could not compare to. But they would face it, together, and maybe, just maybe, that would make all the difference. Dawn came slow and bloody, the kind of dawn that painted everything in shades of copper and ash, like the sky itself was still processing the violence of the night before. Valor stood on the eastern balcony where this had all begun, watching light creep across an empire that had tried to kill him 3 times in as many weeks. The city below stirred, merchants opening shops, guards changing shifts, life continuing because life always continued, indifferent to the dramas of kings and the corpses piled in throne rooms. Behind him, the palace was chaos contained. Commander Rhea's troops had secured every corridor, every chamber, every hidden passage they could find. Bodies had been removed. Blood had been scrubbed from marble for the fourth time in a month. The throne room looked almost normal, except for the gaping hole in the western wall where Rhea's cavalry had smashed through stone like it was paper. Repairs would take months. The political fallout would take years. Vaelor did not care about either. He cared about the woman lying in the royal chambers 3 floors below, skin going gray as the disease won battles her will could not fight. He cared about the twins learning too young that survival meant killing people who smiled at you over dinner. He cared about the fact that winning felt exactly like losing and he could not tell the difference anymore. Footsteps behind him. Soft. Measured. Kyle joined him at the rail. The boy looked older. They all looked older. Violence aged you in ways time could not match. They stood in silence, father and son. Strangers bound by blood and circumstance in a single night of coordinated murder masquerading as justice. Kyle spoke first. How many more are there? How many more conspiracies hiding in corners? Vaelor's voice was rough from smoke and shouting. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Power attracts parasites. The stronger the host, the more they gather. You kill one faction and 3 more rise to fill the gap, so it never ends. No, it never ends. The boy processed this. Vaelor could see him thinking, calculating, trying to find the angle that made it make sense. Then why do it? Why rule if ruling means this? Because the alternative is worse. Because someone has to stand in the gap between order and chaos. And if it is not us, it will be someone who cares less about the people crushed in the process. This is the lie rulers tell themselves. That their tyranny is justified because the next tyrant would be worse. That their cruelty is mercy compared to what could be. Maybe it is true. Maybe it is just something you say to sleep at night after ordering men killed for the crime of ambition. Vaelor did not know anymore. Had stopped knowing somewhere between Torian's confession and Hareth's betrayal. And the moment he held poison in his hand and seriously considered whether dying was easier than this. Kael's next question cut deeper. Do you regret it? Any of it? Vaelor looked at his son. Really looked. Saw himself reflected back. Same eyes, same stubborn set to the jaw. Same refusal to accept easy answers. I regret that your mother had to run, that you grew up without knowing this place, that you had to learn to kill before you learned to trust. But do I regret that you exist? That she came back? That we had these weeks even knowing how they end? No, never. The honesty surprised him. For 16 years he had been calculating. Strategic. Every word measured for political effect. But standing here with his son watching dawn break over an empire held together by violence and will, he found he was too tired to lie. Kyle nodded slowly. Mother wants to see you. She says it is time. Time. The word hung between them like a blade. Vaelor followed his son through corridors that smelled like death and stone polish. Servants bowed as he passed. Guards saluted. All the rituals of power continuing because rituals were all that separated civilization from the chaos constantly pressing against it. The royal chambers were quiet. Lyra sat beside the bed, holding Ceres's hand. She looked up when Vaelor entered. Her eyes were dry but hard. Grief had not broken her, had done the opposite, forged her into something sharp and unforgiving. She stood, moved to let Vaelor take her place, did not speak. What was there to say? They all knew what was happening, had known for months. Knowledge did not make it easier. Vaelor sat, took Ceres's hand. It was cold despite the fire burning in the hearth. Her skin had taken on a translucent quality, like she was already halfway to becoming a ghost. She opened her eyes, focused on him, smiled. It was tired but real. You look terrible. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Vaelor laughed. It came out broken. You should see the other guys I did. Rhea gave me a report. Very thorough, very bloody, very you. She squeezed his hand. The pressure was weak, but there. I am proud of you. For what? Surviving another assassination attempt? For choosing. For putting us first, even when it cost you everything you spent 16 years building. It cost me nothing. The empire is still standing. The empire is broken. Half the noble houses are leaderless. The court is fractured. Your authority is held together by nothing but Rhea's army and the fear of what you will do next. That is not stability. That is the edge of collapse. She was right. Of course she was right. Ceres had always been able to see past the surface to the ugly truth underneath. Then I will hold it together. Rebuild. Make it into something better. No, you will not. Her voice was gentle but firm. You will let it break. Let it fracture into smaller pieces. Give the provinces autonomy. Let the noble houses govern themselves. Centralized power is what created this. What made you vulnerable? What made them think they could take it all by taking you? You want me to dismantle the empire. I want you to transform it into something that does not require one man to sacrifice everything to hold it together, into something our children can inherit without it destroying them the way it destroyed us. Vaelor stared at her. This was insane. Everything his father had built, everything he had maintained, everything that defined what a king was supposed to be. She was asking him to tear it down. And the terrifying part was that she was right. Centralized power was a trap. It made you essential. And being essential made you a target. 1,000 men had died trying to take what he had because what he had was worth killing for. But if the power was distributed, if no single throne controlled everything, then there was nothing worth dying for, nothing worth killing for. It would be a different kind of empire. Weaker, maybe, but more resilient, harder to destroy because there would be no single point of failure. The twins will hate me for it, think I am weak. Ceres's smile was sad. They will understand eventually, when they are older, when they have children of their own and realize that legacy is not about power. It is about what kind of world you leave behind. And what if I am wrong? What if decentralization creates chaos? What if the provinces war with each other? Then they war, and they learn, and they build something new from the ashes. That is what humans do. We break things. We rebuild. We break them again. The cycle does not end, but it does not have to be presided over by one man carrying the weight of it all alone. Vaelor's throat was tight. He wanted to argue, wanted to defend the system he had bled for. But looking at Ceres dying because stress and exile had weakened her enough for disease to take hold, looking at his children who had learned to kill before they learned to love, he could not find the words. Maybe she was right. Maybe the whole structure was poisoned. Maybe the only way to save it was to destroy it. How long do I have before I die? Hours. Maybe less. The healers say my heart is failing. Too much strain, too much damage. It is a miracle I made it this long. A miracle. Vaelor did not believe in miracles. Believed in will and stubbornness and the human capacity to keep moving long after the body should have quit. Ceres had that in abundance, had always had it. What do you need? I need you to promise me something. Anything. Do not let grief make you cruel. Do not go back to being ice. You have learned to feel again, to love, to put people before power. Hold on to that. Teach it to our children. Make it your legacy instead of conquest and control. Her hand tightened on his. A final surge of strength. Promise me. Vaelor's vision blurred. He blinked, felt wetness on his cheeks. When had he started crying? He could not remember the last time. Years, decades maybe. I promise. Ceres's breath hitched, released. Her eyes stayed open, but the light in them dimmed. Not all at once. Gradually. Like watching a candle burn down to nothing. Vaelor held her hand and watched her die and felt something inside him break that had nothing to do with weakness. It was the kind of breaking that came before transformation, the shattering of old patterns to make room for new ones. She was gone. The woman who had challenged him, saved him, left him, returned to him, died for him, gone. And in her absence, Vaelor felt the weight of 16 years of ice finally crack and fall away. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to let warmth back in, enough to remember what it felt like to be human instead of a machine built for ruling. Lyra entered quietly, saw her mother, understood immediately. She moved to the bed, took Ceres's other hand. Kael joined her. They stood together. A family reduced by one, bound by loss and blood and the terrible knowledge that nothing good lasted, but you cherished it anyway because the alternative was living in fear of loss instead of gratitude for having had anything at all. This is grief. Not the performative kind. Not the public mourning designed for political effect, but the private kind. The kind that carves pieces out of you and leaves holes that never quite fill. The kind that teaches you that loving someone means accepting that you will lose them and choosing to love anyway because the pain of loss is proof that what you had was real. They stood vigil until dawn became day, until servants knocked softly and asked what should be done, until the machinery of state demanded attention because empires do not stop for personal tragedy. Vaelor gave orders. Mechanical. Efficient. The queen would lie in state. 3 days of mourning, a funeral befitting her station. All the rituals that marked the passing of power from one generation to the next. But in private, in the moments between obligations, he began the work Cerys had asked of him, drafting edicts, restructuring governance, distributing power to provincial lords, creating a federation instead of an empire, transforming centralized tyranny into distributed authority. The court resisted. Of course they did. This was insanity, weakness, surrender. Vaelor did it anyway, or did, because Cerys had been right. The old system was unsustainable. It required a king willing to sacrifice everything, and even then, it barely held together. Better to build something that did not require such sacrifice. Something that could survive without one man standing alone against the tide. Commander Rhea supported him. She understood that distributed power meant distributed responsibility, meant no single point of failure. She helped him identify which lords could be trusted with autonomy and which needed oversight. The twins watched, learned, saw their father dismantling everything he had fought to build and creating something new from the pieces. Kael asked the question both of them were thinking. Are we still heirs? If there is no central throne, what are we inheriting? Vaelor looked at his children, saw their confusion, their fear that he was abandoning them the way he had abandoned their mother. You are inheriting a choice. You can take the northern provinces, Lyra, the southern, or you can choose different paths entirely. The point is that you get to choose. I am not trapping you in the same cage that trapped me. Lyra's voice was sharp. What if we want the cage? What if we want the throne? Then you will have to earn it. Convince the provincial lords to cede their power back. Build alliances. Prove you are worth following, but it will be your choice, your effort. Not an inheritance that comes with obligations you never agreed to. This is freedom, the kind that terrifies because it removes the structure that tells you who you are supposed to be. Vaelor was giving his children what he never had, the ability to define themselves instead of being defined by a crown. They did not understand, not yet, but they would, when they were older, when they had seen enough of the world to know that freedom was worth more than power. 3 days passed in ritual and mourning. Cerys was laid to rest in the royal crypts beside kings and queens who had ruled centuries ago. Her tomb was simple. Stone carved with her name and the dates that marked her life. No grand pronouncements, no poetic epitaphs, just the facts. She existed. She mattered. She was gone. Vaelor stood before the tomb after everyone else had left, alone with the dead and his thoughts. He spoke to stone in silence. I am doing what you asked, tearing it down, rebuilding, trying to make something better. I do not know if it will work. Do not know if I am strong enough or wise enough or good enough. But I am trying. That has to count for something. The stone did not answer. The dead never did. But speaking the words aloud made them real, made them a commitment instead of just an idea. Vaelor left the crypts, climbed stairs into sunlight. The palace was changing already. Nobles packing, provincial lords preparing to return to their territories with new authority and new responsibilities. The empire fragmenting into pieces that would have to learn to work together instead of being forced to by a single iron fist. It was messy, chaotic, uncertain. It was also honest, real, built on consent instead of coercion. Weeks passed, then months. The transformation was not smooth. 3 provinces tried to seize more power than they were given. 2 lords attempted to form alliances designed to recreate the old system. Vaelor crushed them, not through execution or exile, through negotiation and consequence, through making it clear that distributed power came with distributed accountability. This was harder than ruling through fear, required more patience, more diplomacy, more willingness to compromise. But it was also more sustainable, created a system that could outlast him because it did not depend on him. Kael chose the northern provinces, took up residence in the mountains where winter was a living thing and survival required cooperation. He thrived there, became the kind of leader who led from the front, who earned loyalty through action rather than demanding it through birthright. Lyra chose differently, became an ambassador, traveled between provinces mediating disputes, building connections, creating the web of relationships that held the new federation together. She was better at politics than her brother, better than Vaelor had ever been. She had Ceres's gift for seeing 3 moves ahead and positioning pieces before anyone realized the game had changed. Vaelor watched them grow into their roles, felt pride that had nothing to do with them continuing his legacy and everything to do with them creating their own. A year after Ceres died, Vaelor stood on the eastern balcony again. Same view, same sky. But everything had changed. The palace was quieter now, smaller. Most of the court had dispersed to provincial capitals. What remained was essential staff and the handful of advisors who helped coordinate between autonomous regions. Commander Rhea joined him. She had stayed. Said someone needed to make sure the transition did not collapse into civil war. Vaelor suspected she stayed because she understood what it was like to rebuild yourself after everything you knew fell apart. How does it feel? Her voice was casual, but the question was not. Vaelor considered. Empty, lighter, terrifying. Right, all of it at once. That sounds about correct. They stood in comfortable silence, 2 people who had survived violence and betrayal and the grinding weight of responsibility, who had learned that strength was not about domination. It was about knowing when to hold on and when to let go. Do you regret it? Giving up absolute power? Every day. And also never. It is complicated. Most important things are. Vaelor smiled. It felt strange on his face, unfamiliar, but not wrong. The Empire, what was left of it, held. Not through force, through mutual interest and the realization that cooperation was more profitable than conflict. It was not perfect. Disputes still arose. Power struggles still happened. But they were smaller, more manageable, less likely to burn everything down. And Vaelor was not alone anymore, had advisors he trusted, children who visited, a legacy that was not built on fear. He thought about Ceres often, wondered what she would think of what he had built, whether she would approve or criticize or simply smile that knowing smile that meant she had predicted this outcome months ago. He visited her tomb weekly, spoke to stone about decisions and doubts and the strange emptiness that came from no longer being essential, from being able to walk away without the Empire collapsing. It was not the life he had planned, not the ending he had imagined, but it was honest, real, built on choices made freely instead of obligations inherited. 2 years after her death, Vaelor stood in the throne room. The hole in the western wall had been repaired. The blood had long since been scrubbed away. The throne itself remained, black stone veined with gold, a monument to what had been. Vaelor sat on it one last time, felt the cold stone, the weight of history, the expectations of generations. Then he stood, walked away, left it empty. He had written the edict that morning. Effective immediately, the throne was retired, kept as a historical artifact but stripped of political power. The Federation would be governed by a council of provincial lords. Rotating leadership, distributed authority, no single point of failure. It was not a perfect system, but it was better than what had been. Kael and Lyra had approved. They understood that their father was not abandoning them. He was freeing them, giving them the choice he never had. That night, Vaelor slept without nightmares for the first time in decades, without the weight of empire crushing his chest, without the constant calculation of threats and schemes and the price of survival. He dreamed of Ceres, not as she was at the end, but as she had been when they first met. Young, fierce, unbroken by the world. She smiled at him in the dream and spoke words he could not quite hear, but understood anyway. You did well. You learned. You changed. That is all anyone can do. He woke at dawn, stood on the balcony watching light spill across a world that no longer belonged to him, that had never really belonged to him, that belonged to everyone willing to fight for it. This is legacy, not conquest or control, not monuments built from fear, but the quiet knowledge that you left things better than you found them, that the people who come after will have choices you did not, that love, Messy and complicated and painful as it is, matters more than power. Valor had learned this too late, had paid for the lesson in blood and loss and 16 years of ice that nearly killed everything human in him. But he had learned. And maybe that was enough. The sun rose. The empire, fractured and reformed into something new, stirred to life. Valor watched it happen. Not as a king, not as a ruler, just as a man who had survived long enough to see that survival was not the same as living, and living required vulnerability, and vulnerability was not weakness. It was the hardest kind of strength, the kind that admitted you could not do it alone, the kind that trusted others to carry weight you once thought only you could bear, the kind that chose love over power even when power was safer. Valor had been many things: king, tyrant, husband, father, survivor. But standing there watching dawn break over an empire he no longer controlled, he was simply human, flawed, damaged, trying. And in the end, trying was all any of them could do. The empire would continue, would evolve, would face new challenges and create new systems and rebuild and break again. That was the nature of human endeavor. Nothing stayed fixed. Nothing lasted forever. But for this moment, for this breath between heartbeats, there was peace. And Valor, who had spent his entire life fighting, finally understood that peace was not weakness. It was the reward for knowing when to stop fighting. He turned from the balcony, walked inside. The palace waited, smaller now, quieter, but still standing. Like him, still standing, and that in the end was victory enough.